Ann Veronica by H. G. Wells. Chapter the 15th. The Last Days at Home. Part 1. They decided to go to Switzerland at the session's end. "We'll clean up everything tidy," said Capes. For her pride's sake, and to save herself from long daydreams and an unappeasable longing for her lover, Ann Veronica worked hard at her biology during those closing weeks. She was, as Capes had said, a hard young woman. She was keenly resolved to do well in the school examination and not to be drowned in the seas of emotion that threatened to submerge her intellectual being. Nevertheless, she could not prevent a rising excitement as the dawn of the new life drew near to her, a thrilling of the nerves, a secret and delicious exaltation above the common circumstances of existence. Sometimes her straying mind would become astonishingly active, embroidering bright and decorative things that she could say to Capes. Sometimes it passed into a state of passive acquiescence, into a radiant, formless, golden joy. She was aware of people, her aunt, her father, her fellow students, friends, and neighbors, moving about outside this glowing secret, very much as an actor is aware of the dim audience beyond the barrier of the footlights. They might applaud, or object, or interfere, but the drama was her very own. She was going through with that anyhow. The feeling of last days grew stronger with her as their number diminished. She went about the familiar home with a clearer and clearer sense of inevitable conclusions. She became exceptionally considerate and affectionate with her father and aunt, and more concerned about the coming catastrophe that she was about to precipitate upon them. Her aunt had a once exasperating habit of interrupting her work with demands for small household services, but now Ann Veronica rendered them with a queer readiness of anticipatory propitiation. She was greatly exercised by the problem of confiding the Widgetts. They were dears, and she talked away 2 evenings with Constance without broaching the topic. She made some vague intimations in letters to Miss Miniver that Miss Miniver failed to mark. But she did not bother her head very much about her relations with these sympathizers. And at length her penultimate day in Morningside Park dawned for her. She got up early and walked about the garden in the dewy June sunshine and revived her childhood. She was saying good-bye to childhood and home and her making. She was going out into the great multitudinous world. This time there would be no returning. She was at the end of girlhood and on the eve of a woman's crowning experience. She visited the corner that had been her own little garden. Her forget-me-nots and candytuft had long since been elbowed into insignificance by weeds. She visited the raspberry canes that had sheltered that first love affair with the little boy in velvet, and the greenhouse where she had been wont to read her secret letters. Here was the place behind the shed where she had used to hide from Roddy's persecutions, and here the border of herbaceous perennials under whose stems was fairyland. The back of the house had been the Alps for climbing, and the shrubs in front of it a terrain. The knots and broken pale that made the garden fence scalable, and gave access to the fields behind, were still to be traced. And here against a wall were the plum trees. In spite of God and wasps and her father, she had stolen plums, and once because of discovered misdeeds, and once because she had realized that her mother was dead. She had lain on her face in the unmown grass, beneath the elm trees that came beyond the vegetables, and poured out her soul in weeping. Remote little Ann Veronica! She would never know the heart of that child again. That child had loved fairy princes with velvet suits and golden locks, and she was in love with a real man named Capes, with little gleams of gold on his cheek, and a pleasant voice and firm and shapely hands. She was going to him soon and certainly, going to his strong, embracing arms. She was going through a new world with him side by side. She had been so busy with life that, for a vast gulf of time, as it seemed, she had given no thought to those ancient, imagined things of her childhood. Now, abruptly, they were real again, though very distant, and she had come to say farewell to them across one sundering year. She was unusually helpful at breakfast and unselfish about the eggs, and then she went off to catch the train before her father's. She did this to please him. He hated travelling second class with her. Indeed, he never did. But he also disliked travelling in the same train when his daughter was in an inferior class, because of the look of the thing. So he liked to go by a different train. and in the avenue she had an encounter with Ramage. It was an odd little encounter that left vague and dubitable impressions in her mind. She was aware of him, a silk-hatted, shiny black figure on the opposite side of the avenue. And then, abruptly and startlingly, he crossed the road and saluted and spoke to her. "I must speak to you," he said. "I can't keep away from you." She made some inane response. She was struck by a change in his appearance. His eyes looked a little bloodshot to her. His face had lost something of its ruddy freshness. He began a jerky, broken conversation that lasted until they reached the station, and left her puzzled at its drift and meaning. She quickened her pace, and so did he, talking at her slightly averted ear. She made lumpish and inadequate interruptions rather than replies. At times he seemed to be claiming pity from her, at times he was threatening her with her check and exposure, at times he was boasting of his inflexible will, and how, in the end, he always got what he wanted. He said that his life was boring and stupid without her. Something or other, she did not catch what, he was damned if he could stand. He was evidently nervous and very anxious to be impressive. His projecting eyes sought to dominate. The crowning aspect of the incident, for her mind, was the discovery that he and her indiscretion with him no longer mattered very much. Its importance had vanished with her abandonment of compromise. Even her debt to him was a triviality now. And of course she had a brilliant idea. It surprised her she hadn't thought of it before. She tried to explain that she was going to pay him £40 without fail next week. She said as much to him. She repeated this breathlessly. "I was glad you did not send it back again," he said. He touched a long-standing sore, and Ann Veronica found herself vainly trying to explain the inexplicable. "It's because I mean to send it back altogether," she said. He ignored her protests in order to pursue some impressive line of his own. "Here we are, living in the same suburb," he began. "We have to be modern." Her heart leapt within her as she caught that phrase. That knot also would be cut. Modern indeed! She was going to be as primordial as chipped flint. Part 2. In the late afternoon, as Ann Veronica was gathering flowers for the dinner-table, her father came strolling across the lawn toward her with an affectation of great deliberation. "I want to speak to you about a little thing, Vee," said Mr. Stanley. Ann Veronica's tense nerves started, and she stood still with her eyes upon him, wondering what it might be that impended. "You were talking to that fellow Ramage to-day, in the Avenue, walking to the station with him." So that was it. "He came and talked to me." "Yes," Mr. Stanley considered. "Well, I don't want you to talk to him," he said, very firmly. Ann Veronica paused before she answered. "Don't you think I ought to?" she asked, very submissively. "No." Mr. Stanley coughed and faced toward the house. "He is not... I don't like him. I think it inadvisable. I don't want an intimacy to spring up between you and a man of that type." Ann Veronica reflected. "I have had 1 or 2 talks with him, Daddy." "Don't let there be any more. In fact, I dislike him extremely." "Suppose he comes and talks to me?" "A girl can always keep a man at a distance if she cares to do it. She can snub him." Ann Veronica picked a cornflower. "I wouldn't make this objection," Mr. Stanley went on, "but there are stories about Ramage. He lives in a world of possibilities outside your imagination. His treatment of his wife is most unsatisfactory. Most unsatisfactory. A bad man, in fact. A dissipated, loose-living man." "I'll try not to see him again," said Ann Veronica. "I didn't know you objected to him, Daddy." "Strongly," said Mr. Stanley. "Very strongly." The conversation hung. Ann Veronica wondered what her father would do if she were to tell him the full story of her relations with Ramage. "A man like that taints a girl by looking at her, by his mere conversation." He adjusted his glasses on his nose. There was another little thing he had to say. "One has to be so careful of one's friends and acquaintances," he remarked, by way of transition. "They mould one insensibly." His voice assumed an easy, detached tone. "I suppose, Vee, you don't see much of those Widgetts now?" "I go in and talk to Constance sometimes." "Do you?" "We were great friends at school." "No doubt. Still, I don't know whether I quite like something ramshackle about those people, Vee. While I am talking about your friends, I think you ought to know how I look at it." His voice conveyed studied moderation. "I don't mind, of course, your seeing her sometimes. Still there are differences in social atmospheres. One gets drawn into things. Before you know where you are, you find yourself in a complication. I don't want to influence you unduly, but they're artistic people, Vee. That's the fact about them. We're different." "I suppose we are," said Vee, rearranging the flowers in her hand. "Friendships that are all very well between schoolgirls don't always go on into later life. It's a social difference." "I like Constance very much." "No doubt. Still, one has to be reasonable. As you admitted to me, one has to square one's self with the world. You don't know. With people of that sort, all sorts of things may happen. We don't want things to happen." Ann Veronica made no answer. A vague desire to justify himself ruffled her father. "I may seem unduly anxious. I can't forget about your sister. It's that has always made me she, you know, was drawn into a set. Didn't discriminate private theatricals." Ann Veronica remained anxious to hear more of her sister's story from her father's point of view, but he did not go on. Even so much allusion as this to that family shadow, she felt, was an immense recognition of her ripening years. She glanced at him. He stood a little anxious and fussy, bothered by the responsibility of her, entirely careless of what her life was or was likely to be, ignoring her thoughts and feelings, ignorant of every fact of importance in her life, explaining everything he could not understand in her as nonsense and perversity, concerned only with a terror of bothers and undesirable situations. "We don't want things to happen." Never had he shown his daughter so clearly that the womenkind he was persuaded he had to protect and control could please him in one way, and in one way only, and that was by doing nothing except the punctual domestic duties, and being nothing except restful appearances. He had quite enough to see to and worry about in the city without their doing things. He had no use for Ann Veronica. He had never had a use for her since she had been too old to sit upon his knee. Nothing but the constraint of social usage now linked him to her. And the less anything happened, the better. The less she lived, in fact, the better. These realizations rushed into Ann Veronica's mind and hardened her heart against him. She spoke slowly. "I may not see the Widgetts for some little time, father," she said. "I don't think I shall." "Some little tiff?" "No, but I don't think I shall see them." Suppose she were to add, "I am going away." "I'm glad to hear you say it," said Mr. Stanley, and was so evidently pleased that Ann Veronica's heart smote her. "I am very glad to hear you say it," he repeated, and refrained from further inquiry. "I think we are growing sensible," he said. "I think you are getting to understand me better." He hesitated and walked away from her toward the house. Her eyes followed him. The curve of his shoulders, the very angle of his feet, expressed relief at her apparent obedience. "Thank goodness," said that retreating aspect. "That's said and over. Vee's all right. There's nothing happened at all." She didn't mean, he concluded, to give him any more trouble ever, and he was free to begin a fresh chromatic novel. He had just finished The Blue Lagoon, which he thought very beautiful and tender and absolutely irrelevant to Morningside Park. or work in peace at his microtome without bothering her in the least. The immense disillusionment that awaited him. The devastating disillusionment. She had a vague desire to run after him, to state her case to him, to wring some understanding from him of what life was to her. She felt a cheat and a sneak to his unsuspecting retreating back. "But what can one do?" asked Ann Veronica. Part 3. She dressed carefully for dinner in a black dress that her father liked, and that made her look serious and responsible. Dinner was quite uneventful. Her father read a draft prospectus warily, and her aunt dropped fragments of her projects for managing while the cook had a holiday. After dinner, Ann Veronica went into the drawing-room with Miss Stanley, and her father went up to his den for his pipe and pensive petrography. Later in the evening she heard him whistling, poor man. She felt very restless and excited. She refused coffee, though she knew that anyhow she was doomed to a sleepless night. She took up one of her father's novels and put it down again, fretted up to her own room for some work, sat on her bed, and meditated upon the room that she was now really abandoning forever, and returned at length with the stocking to darn. Her aunt was making herself cuffs out of little slips of insertion under the newly lit lamp. Ann Veronica sat down in the other armchair and darned badly for a minute or so. Then she looked at her aunt and traced with a curious eye the careful arrangement of her hair, her sharp nose, the little drooping lines of mouth and chin and cheek. Her thoughts spoke aloud. "Were you ever in love, aunt?" she asked. Her aunt glanced up, startled, and then sat very still, with hands that had ceased to work. "What makes you ask such a question, Vee?" she said. "I wondered." Her aunt answered in a low voice. "I was engaged to him, dear, for 7 years, and then he died." Ann Veronica made a sympathetic little murmur. "He was in holy orders, and we were to have been married when he got a living. He was a Wiltshire Edmondshaw, a very old family." She sat very still. Ann Veronica hesitated with a question that had leapt up in her mind, and that she felt was cruel. "Are you sorry you waited, aunt?" she said. Her aunt was a long time before she answered. "His stipend forbade it," she said, and seemed to fall into a train of thought. "It would have been rash and unwise," she said at the end of a meditation. "What he had was altogether insufficient." Ann Veronica looked at the mildly pensive gray eyes and the comfortable, rather refined face with a penetrating curiosity. Presently her aunt sighed deeply and looked at the clock. "Time for my patience," she said. She got up, put the neat cuffs she had made into her work-basket, and went to the bureau for the little cards in the morocco case. Ann Veronica jumped up to get her the card-table. "I haven't seen the new patients, dear," she said. "May I sit beside you?" "It's a very difficult one," said her aunt. "Perhaps you will help me shuffle." Ann Veronica did, and also assisted nimbly with the arrangements of the rows of 8 with which the struggle began. Then she sat watching the play, sometimes offering a helpful suggestion, sometimes letting her attention wander to the smoothly shining arms she had folded across her knees, just below the edge of the table. She was feeling extraordinarily well that night, so that the sense of her body was a deep delight, a realization of a gentle warmth and strength and elastic firmness. Then she glanced at the cards again, over which her aunt's many-ringed hand played, and then at the rather weak, rather plump face that surveyed its operations. It came to Ann Veronica that life was wonderful beyond measure. It seemed incredible that she and her aunt were indeed creatures of the same blood, only by a birth or so different beings, and part of that same broad interlacing stream of human life that has invented the fauns and nymphs, Astarte, Aphrodite, Freya, and all the twining beauty of the gods. The love songs of all the ages were singing in her blood, the scent of night-stock from the garden filled the air, and the moths that beat upon the closed frames of the window next to the lamp set her mind dreaming of kisses in the dusk. Yet her aunt, with a ringed hand flitting to her lips and a puzzled, worried look in her eyes, deaf to all this riot of warmth and flitting desire, was playing Patience. Playing Patience, as if Dionysius and her curate had died together. A faint buzz above the ceiling witnessed that petrography, too, was active. Grey and tranquil world. Amazing, passionless world. A world in which days without meaning, days in which we don't want things to happen, followed days without meaning, until the last thing happened, the ultimate, unavoidable, coarse, disagreeable. It was her last evening in that rapid life against which she had rebelled. Warm reality was now so near her she could hear it beating in her ears. Away in London even now Capes was packing and preparing. Capes, the magic man whose touch turned one to trembling fire. What was he doing? What was he thinking? It was less than a day now, less than 20 hours, 17 hours, 16 hours. She glanced at the soft ticking clock with the exposed brass pendulum upon the white marble mantel, and made a rapid calculation. To be exact, it was just 16 hours and 20 minutes. The slow stars circled on to the moment of their meeting, the softly glittering summer stars. She saw them shining over mountains of snow, over valleys of haze and warm darkness. There would be no moon. "I believe, after all, it's coming out," said Miss Stanley. "The aces made it easy." Ann Veronica started from her reverie, sat up in her chair, became attentive. "Look, dear," she said presently, "you can put the 10 on the jack." End of chapter 15. Ann Veronica by H.G. Wells. Chapter the 16th. In the Mountains. Part 1. Next day Ann Veronica and Capes felt like newborn things. It seemed to them they could never have been really alive before, but only dimly anticipating existence. They sat face to face beneath an experienced-looking rucksack and a brand-new portmanteau and a leather handbag, in the afternoon boat train that goes from Charing Cross to Folkestone for Boulogne. They tried to read illustrated papers in an unconcerned manner, and with forced attention, lest they should catch the leaping exultation in each other's eyes. And they admired Kent sedulously from the windows. They crossed the Channel in sunshine and a breeze that just ruffled the sea to glittering scales of silver. Some of the people who watched them standing side by side thought they must be newly wedded because of their happy faces, and others that they were an old established couple because of their easy confidence in each other. At Boulogne they took train to Basel. Next morning they breakfasted together in the buffet of that station, and thence they caught the Interlaken Express, and so went by way of Spies to Frutigen. There was no railway beyond Frutigen in those days. They sent their baggage by post to Kandersteg, and walked along the mule path to the left of the stream to that queer hollow among the precipices, Blau See, where the petrifying branches of trees lie in the blue deeps of an icy lake, and pine trees clamber among gigantic boulders. A little inn flying a Swiss flag nestles under a great rock, and there they put aside their knapsacks and lunched and rested in the midday shadow of the gorge and the scent of resin. And later they paddled in a boat above the mysterious deeps of the sea, and peered down into the green blues and the blue greens together. By that time it seemed to them they had lived together 20 years. Except for one memorable school excursion to Paris, Ann Veronica had never yet been outside England, so that it seemed to her the whole world had changed. The very light of it had changed. Instead of English villas and cottages, there were chalets and Italian-built houses shining white. There were lakes of emerald and sapphire, and clustering castles, and such sweeps of hill and mountain, such shining uplands of snow as she had never seen before. Everything was fresh and bright, from the kindly manners of the Frutigen cobbler, who hammered mountain nails into her boots, to the unfamiliar wildflowers that spangled the wayside. And Capes had changed into the easiest and jolliest companion in the world. The mere fact that he was there in the train alongside her, helping her, sitting opposite to her in the dining-car, presently sleeping on a seat within a yard of her, made her heart sing until she was afraid their fellow passengers would hear it. It was too good to be true. She would not sleep for fear of losing a moment of that sense of his proximity. To walk beside him, dressed akin to him, rucksacked and companionable, was bliss in itself. Each step she took was like stepping once more across the threshold of heaven. One trouble, however, shot its slanting bolts athwart the shining warmth of that opening day and marred its perfection, and that was the thought of her father. She had treated him badly. She had hurt him and her aunt. She had done wrong by their standards, and she would never persuade them that she had done right. She thought of her father in the garden and of her aunt with her patients, as she had seen them. How many ages was it ago? Just one day intervened. She felt as if she had struck them unawares. The thought of them distressed her without subtracting at all from the oceans of happiness in which she swam. But she wished she could put the thing she had done in some way to them, so that it would not hurt them so much as the truth would certainly do. The thought of their faces, and particularly of her aunt's, as it would meet the fact, disconcerted, unfriendly, condemning, pained, occurred to her again and again. "Oh, I wish," she said, "that people thought alike about these things." Capes watched the limpid water dripping from his oar. "I wish they did," he said, "but they don't." "I feel all this is the rightest of all conceivable things. I want to tell every one. I want to boast myself." "I know." "I told them a lie. I told them lies. I wrote 3 letters yesterday and tore them up. It was so hopeless to put it to them. At last I told a story." "You didn't tell them our position." "I implied we had married." "They'll find out. They'll know." "Not yet." "Sooner or later." "Possibly, bit by bit. But it was hopelessly hard to put. I said I knew he disliked and distrusted you and your work, that you shared all Russell's opinions. He hates Russell beyond measure. And that we couldn't possibly face a conventional marriage. What else could one say? I left him to suppose a registry, perhaps." Capes let his oar smack on the water. "Do you mind very much?" He shook his head. "But it makes me feel inhuman," he added. "And me." "It's the perpetual trouble," he said, "of parent and child. They can't help seeing things in the way they do. Nor can we. We don't think they're right, but they don't think we are. A deadlock. In a very definite sense, we are in the wrong, hopelessly in the wrong. But it's just this. Who was to be hurt?" "I wish no one had to be hurt," said Ann Veronica. "When one is happy, I don't like to think of them. Last time I left home I felt as hard as nails, but this is all different. It is different." "There's a sort of instinct of rebellion," said Capes. "It isn't anything to do with our times particularly. People think it is, but they're wrong. It's to do with adolescence. Long before religion and society heard of doubt, girls were all for midnight coaches and Gretna Green. It's a sort of home-leaving instinct." He followed up a line of thought. "There's another instinct too," he went on, "in a state of suppression, unless I'm very much mistaken. A child-expelling instinct. I wonder. There's no family-uniting instinct, anyhow. It's habit and sentiment and material convenience hold families together after adolescence. There's always friction, conflict, unwilling concessions. Always. I don't believe there is any strong natural affection at all between parents and growing-up children. There wasn't, I know, between myself and my father. I didn't allow myself to see things as they were in those days. Now I do. I bored him. I hated him. I suppose that shocks one's ideas. It's true. There are sentimental and traditional deferences and reverences, I know, between father and son. But that's just exactly what prevents the development of an easy friendship. Father-worshipping sons are abnormal. And they're no good. No good at all. One's got to be a better man than one's father.
Or what is the good of successive generations? Life is rebellion or nothing." He rowed a stroke and watched the swirl of water from his oar broaden and die away. At last he took up his thoughts again. "I wonder if, some day, one won't need to rebel against customs and laws. If this discord will have gone. Some day, perhaps. Who knows? The old won't coddle and hamper the young, and the young won't need to fly in the faces of the old. They'll face facts as facts and understand. Oh, to face facts! Gods! What a world it might be if people faced facts! Understanding! Understanding! There is no other salvation. Some day older people, perhaps, will trouble to understand younger people, and there won't be these fierce disruptions. There won't be barriers one must defy or perish. That's really our choice now. Defy or futility. The world perhaps will be educated out of its idea of fixed standards. I wonder, Ann Veronica, if, when our time comes, we shall be any wiser." Ann Veronica watched a water beetle fussing across the green depths. "One can't tell. I'm a female thing at bottom. I like high tone for a flourish, and stars and ideas. But I want my things." Part 2. Capes thought. "It's odd. I have no doubt in my mind that what we are doing is wrong," he said, "and yet I do it without compunction." "I never felt so absolutely right," said Ann Veronica. "You are a female thing at bottom," he admitted. "I'm not nearly so sure as you. As for me, I look twice at it. Life is two things, that's how I see it. Two things mixed and muddled up together. Life is morality. Life is adventure. Squire and master. Adventure rules, and morality looks up the trains in the Bradshaw. Morality tells you what is right, and adventure moves you. If morality means anything, it means keeping bounds, respecting implications, respecting implicit bounds. If individuality means anything, it means breaking bounds, adventure. Will you be moral and your species, or immoral and yourself? We've decided to be immoral. We needn't try and give ourselves airs. We've deserted the posts in which we found ourselves, cut our duties, exposed ourselves to risks that may destroy any sort of social usefulness in us. I don't know. One keeps rules in order to be one's self. One studies nature in order not to be blindly ruled by her. There's no sense in morality, I suppose, unless you are fundamentally immoral." She watched his face as he traced his way through these speculative thickets. "Look at our affair," he went on, looking up at her. "No power on earth will persuade me we're not two rather disreputable persons. You desert your home, I throw up useful teaching, risk every hope in your career. Here we are absconding, pretending to be what we are not. Shady, to say the least of it. It's not a bit of good pretending there's any higher truth or wonderful principle in this business. There isn't. We never started out in any high-browed manner to scandalize and shellify. When first you left your home, you had no idea that I was the hidden impulse. I wasn't. You came out like an ant for your nuptial flight. It was just a chance that we in particular hit against each other. Nothing predestined about it. We just hit against each other, and here we are, flying off at a tangent, a little surprised at what we are doing, all our principles abandoned, and tremendously and quite unreasonably proud of ourselves. Out of all this we have struck a sort of harmony, and it's gorgeous." "Glorious," said Ann Veronica. "Would you like us if someone told you the bare outline of our story and what we are doing?" "I shouldn't mind," said Ann Veronica. "But if someone else asked your advice, if someone else said, 'Here is my teacher, a jaded married man on the verge of middle age, and he and I have a violent passion for one another. We propose to disregard all our ties, all our obligations, all the established prohibitions of society, and begin life together afresh.' What would you tell her?" "If she asked advice, I should say she wasn't fit to do anything of the sort. I should say that having a doubt was enough to condemn it." but waive that point. It would be different all the same. It wouldn't be you. It wouldn't be you either. I suppose that's the gist of the whole thing. He stared at a little eddy. The rule's all right, so long as there isn't a case. Rules are for established things, like the pieces and positions of a game. Men and women are not established things. They're experiments, all of them. Every human being is a new thing, exists to do new things. Find the thing you want to do most intensely, make sure that's it, and do it with all your might. If you live, well and good. If you die, well and good. Your purpose is done. Well, this is our thing. He woke the glassy water to swirling activity again, and made the deep blue shapes below writhe and shiver. "This is my thing," said Ann Veronica softly, with thoughtful eyes upon him. Then she looked up the sweep of pine trees to the towering sunlit cliffs and the high heaven above, and then back to his face. She drew in a deep breath of the sweet mountain air. Her eyes were soft and grave, and there was the faintest of smiles upon her resolute lips. Part 3. Later they loitered along a winding path above the inn and made love to one another. Their journey had made them indolent. The afternoon was warm, and it seemed impossible to breathe a sweeter air. The flowers and turf, a wild strawberry, a rare butterfly, and such like little intimate things had become more interesting than mountains. Their flitting hands were always touching. Deep silences came between them. "I had thought to go on to Kandersteg," said Capes. "But this is a pleasant place. There is not a soul in the inn but ourselves. Let us stay the night here, then we can loiter and gossip to our heart's content." "Agreed," said Ann Veronica. "After all, it's our honeymoon." "All we shall get," said Ann Veronica. "This place is very beautiful." "Any place would be beautiful," said Ann Veronica in a low voice. For a time they walked in silence. "I wonder," she began presently, "why I love you, and love you so much. I know now what it is to be an abandoned female. I am an abandoned female. I'm not ashamed of the things I'm doing. I want to put myself into your hands. You know, I wish I could roll my little body up small and squeeze it into your hand and grip your fingers upon it. Tight. I want you to hold me and have me so... everything. Everything. It's a pure joy of giving, giving to you. I have never spoken of these things to any human being. Just dreamed, and ran away even from my dreams. It is as if my lips had been sealed about them, and now I break the seals, for you. Only I wish today I was 1,000 times, 10,000 times more beautiful." Capes lifted her hand and kissed it. "You are 1,000 times more beautiful," he said, "than anything else could be. You are you. You are all the beauty in the world. Beauty doesn't mean, never has meant, anything at all but you. It heralded you, promised you." Part 4. They lay side by side in a shallow nest of turf and mosses among boulders and stunted bushes on a high rock, and watched the day sky deep into evening between the vast precipices overhead, and looked over the tree-tops down the widening gorge. A distant suggestion of chalets and a glimpse of the road set them talking for a time of the world they had left behind. Capes spoke casually of their plans for work. "It's a flabby, loose-willed world we have to face. It won't even know whether to be scandalized at us or forgiving. It will hold aloof, a little undecided whether to pelt or not." "That depends whether we carry ourselves as though we expected pelting," said Ann Veronica. "We won't." "No fear." "Then, as we succeed, it will begin to sidle back to us. It will do its best to overlook things. If we let it, poor dear. That's if we succeed. If we fail, said Capes, then... We aren't going to fail, said Ann Veronica. Life seemed a very brave and glorious enterprise to Ann Veronica that day. She was quivering with the sense of Capes at her side and glowing with heroic love. It seemed to her that if they put their hands jointly against the Alps and pushed, they would be able to push them aside. She lay and nibbled at a sprig of dwarf rhododendron. "Fail!" she said. Part 5. Presently it occurred to Ann Veronica to ask about the journey he had planned. He had his sections of the Siegfried map folded in his pocket, and he squatted up with his legs crossed like an Indian idol, while she lay prone beside him and followed every movement of his indicatory finger. "Here," he said, "is this Blaau Sea, and here we rest until tomorrow. I think we rest here until tomorrow." There was a brief silence. "It is a very pleasant place," said Ann Veronica, biting a rhododendron stalk through, and with that faint shadow of a smile returning to her lips. "And then?" said Ann Veronica. "Then we go on to this place, the Oceaninsee. It's a lake among precipices, and there is a little inn where we can stay and sit and eat our dinner at a pleasant table that looks upon the lake. For some days we shall be very idle there among the trees and rocks. There are boats on the lake and shady depths and wildernesses of pine wood. After a day or so, perhaps, we will go on one or two little excursions and see how good your head is, a mild scramble or so, and then up to a hut on a pass just here, and out upon the bloomless Alp glacier that spreads out so and so." She roused herself from some dream at the word. "Glaciers," she said. "Under the wild Froh, which was named after you." He bent and kissed her hair and paused, and then forced his attention back to the map. "One day," he resumed, "we will start off early and come down into Kandersteg, and up these zigzags, and here, and so past this Dolbensee to a tiny inn. It won't be busy yet, though. We may get it all to ourselves. On the brim of the steepest zigzag you can imagine, thousands of feet of zigzag. And you will sit and eat lunch with me and look out across the Rhone Valley and over blue distances beyond blue distances to the Matterhorn and Monte Rosa and a long regiment of sunny, snowy mountains. And when we see them we shall at once want to go to them. That's the way with beautiful things. And down we shall go, like flies down a wall, to Leukerbad, and so to Luck Station here, and then by train up the Rhone Valley, and this little side valley to Stalden. And there, in the cool of the afternoon, we shall start off up a gorge, torrents and cliffs below us and above us, to sleep in a half-way inn, and go on next day to Saas Fee, Saas of the magic, Saas of the pagan people. And there, about Saas, are ice and snows again. And sometimes we will loiter among the rocks and trees about Saas, or peep into Samuel Butler's chapels, and sometimes we will climb up out of the way of the other people onto the glaciers and snow. And for one expedition at least, we will go up this desolate valley here to Matmark, and so on to Monte Moro. There indeed you see Monte Rosa, almost the best of all." "Is it very beautiful?" "When I saw it there it was very beautiful. It was wonderful. It was the crowned queen of mountains in her robes of shining white. It towered up high above the level of the pass, thousands of feet, still, shining and white, and below, thousands of feet below, was a floor of little woolly clouds. And then presently these clouds began to wear thin and expose steep, deep slopes going down and down, with grass and pine trees, down and down, and at last, through a great rent in the clouds, bare roofs, shining like very minute pin-heads, and a road like a fibre of white silk. Macugnana in Italy. It will be a fine day, it will have to be, when you first set eyes on Italy. That's as far as we go." "Can't we go down into Italy?" "No," he said, "it won't run to that now. We must wave our hands at the blue hills far away there, and go back to London and work." "But Italy?" "Italy's for a good girl," he said, and laid his hand for a moment on her shoulder. She must look forward to Italy. "I say," she reflected, "you are rather the master, you know." The idea struck him as novel. "Of course I'm manager for this expedition," he said after an interval of self-examination. She slid her cheek down the tweed sleeve of his coat. "Nice sleeve," she said, and came to his hand and kissed it. "I say," he cried, "look here. Aren't you going a little too far? This is degradation. Making a fuss with sleeves. You mustn't do things like that." "Why not?" "Free woman and equal." "I do it of my own free will," said Ann Veronica, kissing his hand again. "It's nothing to what I will do." "Oh, well," he said a little doubtfully, "it's just a phase," and bent down and rested his hand on her shoulder for a moment, with his heart beating and his nerves a-quiver. Then, as she lay very still, with her hands clenched and her black hair tumbled about her face, he came still closer and softly kissed the nape of her neck. Part 6. Most of the things that he had planned they did, but they climbed more than he had intended, because Ann Veronica proved rather a good climber, steady-headed and plucky, rather daring, but quite willing to be cautious at his command. One of the things that most surprised him in her was her capacity for blind obedience. She loved to be told to do things. He knew the circle of mountains about Saas Fee fairly well. He had been there twice before, and it was fine to get away from the straggling pedestrians into the high, lonely places, and sit and munch sandwiches and talk together and do things together that were just a little difficult and dangerous. And they could talk, they found, and never once, it seemed, did their meaning and intention hitch. They were enormously pleased with one another. They found each other beyond measure better than they had expected, if only because of the want of substance in mere expectation. Their conversation degenerated again and again into a strain of self-congratulation that would have irked an eavesdropper. "I don't know," said Ann Veronica. "You're splendid." "It isn't that you're splendid or I," said Capes, "but we satisfy one another. Heaven alone knows why. So completely. The oddest fitness. What is it made of? Texture of skin and texture of mind? Complexion and voice. I don't think I've got illusions, nor you. If I had never met anything of you at all but a scrap of your skin binding a book, Ann Veronica, I know I would have kept that somewhere near to me. All your faults are just jolly modelling to make you real and solid." "The faults are the best part of it," said Ann Veronica. "Why, even our little vicious strains run the same way, even our coarseness." "Coarse?" said Capes. "We're not coarse." "But if we were?" said Ann Veronica. "I can talk to you and you to me without a scrap of effort," said Capes. "That's the essence of it. It's made up of things as small as the diameter of hairs and big as life and death. One always dreamed of this and never believed it. It's the rarest luck, the wildest, most impossible accident. Most people, everyone I know else, seem to have mated with foreigners and to talk uneasily in unfamiliar tongues, to be afraid of the knowledge the other one has, of the other one's perpetual misjudgment and misunderstandings. Why don't they wait?" he added. Ann Veronica had one of her flashes of insight. "One doesn't wait," said Ann Veronica. She expanded that. "I shouldn't have waited," she said. "I might have muddled for a time. But it's as you say. I've had the rarest luck and fallen on my feet." "We've both fallen on our feet. We're the rarest of mortals, the real thing. There's not a compromise nor a sham nor a concession between us. We aren't afraid. We don't bother. We don't consider each other. We needn't. That rapid life, as you call it. We've burned the confounded rags, danced out of it. We're stark." "Stark!" echoed Ann Veronica. Part 7. As they came back from that day's climb, it was up the Mittagong. They had to cross a shining space of wet, steep rocks between two grass slopes that needed a little care. There were a few loose, broken fragments of rock to reckon with upon the ledges, and one place where hands did as much work as toes. They used the rope, not that a rope was at all necessary, but because Ann Veronica's exalted state of mind made the fact of the rope agreeably symbolical. And anyhow, it did ensure joint death in the event of some remotely possible mischance. Capes went first, finding footholds, and, where the drops in the strata edges came like long, awkward steps, placing Ann Veronica's feet. About halfway across this interval, when everything seemed going well, Capes had a shock. "Heavens!" exclaimed Ann Veronica with extraordinary passion. "My God!" and ceased to move. Capes became rigid and adhesive. Nothing ensued. "All right?" he asked. "I'll have to pay it." "Eh?" "I've forgotten something. Oh, cuss it!" "Eh?" "He said I would." "What?" "That's the devil of it." "Devil of what? You do use foul language." "Forget about it like this." "Forget what?" "And I said I wouldn't. I said I'd do anything. I said I'd make shirts." "Shirts?" "Shirts at one and something a dozen. Oh, goodness! Bilking! Ann Veronica, you're a bilker." Pause. "Will you tell me what all this is about?" said Capes. "It's about £40." Capes waited patiently. "Gee, I'm sorry, but you've got to lend me £40." "It's some sort of delirium," said Capes. "The rarefied air? I thought you had a better head." "No, I'll explain lower. It's all right. Let's go on climbing now. It's a thing I've unaccountably overlooked. All right, really. It can wait a bit longer. I borrowed £40 from Mr. Ramage. Thank goodness you'll understand. That's why I chucked Manning. All right, I'm coming. But all this business has driven it clean out of my head. That's why he was so annoyed, you know." "Who was annoyed?" "Mr. Ramage, about the £40. She took a step. "My dear," she added by way of afterthought, "you do obliterate things." Part 8. They found themselves next day talking love to one another high up on some rocks above a steep bank of snow that overhung a precipice on the eastern side of the Fee Glacier. By this time Capes' hair had bleached nearly white, and his skin had become a skin of red copper shot with gold. They were now both in a state of unprecedented physical fitness, and such skirts as Ann Veronica had had when she entered the Valley of Saas were safely packed away in the hotel, and she wore a leather belt and loose knickerbockers and puttees, a costume that suited the fine long lines of her limbs far better than any feminine walking dress could do. Her complexion had resisted the snow glare wonderfully. Her skin had only deepened its natural warmth a little under the Alpine sun. She had pushed aside her azure veil, taken off her snow-glasses, and sat smiling under her hand at the shining glories, the lit cornices, the blue shadows, the softly rounded enormous snow masses, the deep places full of quivering luminosity, of the Taschhorn and Dom. The sky was cloudless, effulgent blue. Capes sat watching and admiring her, and then he fell praising the day and fortune and their love for each other. "Here we are," he said, "shining through each other like light through a stained-glass window, with this air in our blood, this sunlight soaking us. Life is so good. Can it ever be so good again?" Ann Veronica put out a firm hand and squeezed his arm. "It's very good," she said. "It's glorious good. Suppose now, look at this long snow slope, and then that blue deep beyond. Do you see that round pool of colour in the ice, 1,000 feet or more below? Yes? Well, think. We've got to go but 10 steps and lie down and put our arms about each other. See? Down we should rush in a foam, in a cloud of snow, to flight and a dream. All the rest of our lives would be together then, Ann Veronica, every moment, and no ill chances." if you tempt me too much," she said after a silence, "I shall do it. I need only just jump up and throw myself upon you. I'm a desperate young woman. And then as we went down you'd try to explain, and that would spoil it. You know you don't mean it." "No, I don't. But I like to say it." "Rather. But I wonder why you don't mean it." "Because, I suppose, the other thing is better. What other reason could there be? It's more complex, but it's better. This glissade would be damned scoundrelism. You know that, and I know that, though we might be put to it to find a reason why. It would be swindling, drawing the pay of life and then not living. And besides, we're going to live, Ann Veronica. Oh, the things we'll do, the life we'll lead. There'll be trouble in it at times. You and I aren't going to run without friction. But we've got the brains to get over that and tongues in our heads to talk to each other. We shan't hang up on any misunderstanding. Not us. And we're going to fight that old world down there, that old world that had shoved up that silly old hotel and all the rest of it. If we don't live it, we'll think we are afraid of it. Die, indeed. We're going to do work. We're going to unfold about each other. We're going to have children." "Girls!" said Ann Veronica. "Boys!" said Capes. "Both!" said Ann Veronica. "Lots of 'em." Capes chuckled. "You delicate female." "Who cares?" said Ann Veronica. "Seeing it's you. Warm, soft little wonders. Of course I want them." Part 9. "All sorts of things we're going to do," said Capes. "All sorts of times we're going to have. Sooner or later we'll certainly do something to clean those prisons you told me about. Lime wash the underside of life. You and I. We can love on a snow cornice. We can love over a pail of whitewash. Love anywhere. Anywhere. Moonlight and music. Pleasing, you know, but quite unnecessary. We met dissecting dogfish. Do you remember your first day with me? Do you indeed remember? The smell of decay and cheap methylated spirit. My dear, we've had so many moments. I used to go over the times we'd had together, the things we'd said, like a rosary of beads. But now it's beads by the cask, like the hold of a West African trader. It feels like too much gold dust clutched in one's hand. One doesn't want to lose a grain, and one must. Some of it must slip through one's fingers." "I don't care if it does," said Ann Veronica. "I don't care a rap for remembering. I care for you. This moment couldn't be better until the next moment comes. That's how it takes me. Why should we hoard? We aren't going out presently like Japanese lanterns in a gale. It's the poor dears who do, who know they will, know they can't keep it up, who need to clutch at wayside flowers, and put 'em in little books for remembrance. Flattened flowers aren't for the likes of us. Moments, indeed! We like each other fresh and fresh. It isn't illusions. For us. We two just love each other, the real identical other, all the time." "The real identical other," said Capes, and took and bit the tip of her little finger. "There's no delusion so far as I know," said Ann Veronica. "I don't believe there is one. If there is, it's a mere wrapping. There's better underneath. It's only as if I'd begun to know you the day before yesterday or thereabouts. You keep on coming truer, after you have seemed to come altogether true. You brick!" Part 10. "To think," he cried, "you are 10 years younger than I. There are times when you make me feel a little thing at your feet, a young, silly, protected thing. Do you know, Ann Veronica, it is all a lie about your birth certificate, a forgery, and fooling at that. You are one of the immortals. Immortal! You were in the beginning, and all the men in the world who have known what love is have worshipped at your feet. You have converted me to Lester Ward! You are my dear friend. You are a slip of a girl. But there are moments when my head has been on your breast, when your heart has been beating close to my ears, when I have known you for the goddess, when I have wished myself your slave, when I have wished that you could kill me for the joy of being killed by you. You are the high priestess of life." "Your priestess," whispered Ann Veronica softly. "A silly little priestess who knew nothing of life at all until she came to you." Part 11. They sat for a time without speaking a word, in an enormous shining glow of mutual satisfaction. "Well," said Capes at length, "we've got to go down, Ann Veronica. Life waits for us." He stood up and waited for her to move. "Gods!" cried Ann Veronica, and kept him standing. "And to think that it's not a full year ago since I was a black-hearted rebel schoolgirl, distressed, puzzled, perplexed, not understanding that this great force of love was bursting its way through me. All those nameless discontents, they were no more than love's birth-pangs. I felt living in a masked world. I felt as though I had bandaged eyes. I felt wrapped in thick cobwebs. They blinded me. They got in my mouth. And now, dear, dear, the dayspring from on high hath visited me. I love. I am loved. I want to shout. I want to sing. I am glad to be alive because you are alive. I am glad to be a woman because you are a man. I am glad. I am glad. I am glad. I thank God for life in you. I thank God for his sunlight on your face. I thank God for the beauty you love and the faults you love. I thank God for the very skin that is peeling from your nose, for all things great and small that make us what we are. This is grace I am saying. Oh, my dear, all the joy and weeping of life are mixed in me now, and all the gratitude. Never a new-born dragonfly that spread its wings in the morning has felt as glad as I." End of chapter 16. Ann Veronica by H.G. Wells. Chapter the 17th. In Perspective. Part 1. About 4 years and a quarter later, to be exact it was 4 years and 4 months, Mr. and Mrs. Capes stood side by side upon an old Persian carpet that did duty as a hearthrug in the dining-room of their flat, and surveyed a shining dinner-table set for 4 people, lit by skilfully shaded electric lights, brightened by frequent gleams of silver, and carefully and simply adorned with sweet pea blossom. Capes had altered scarcely at all during the interval, except for a new quality of smartness in the cut of his clothes, but Ann Veronica was nearly half an inch taller, her face was at once stronger and softer, her neck firmer and rounder, and her carriage definitely more womanly than it had been in the days of her rebellion. She was a woman now to the tips of her fingers. She had said good-bye to her girlhood in the old garden 4 years and a quarter ago. She was dressed in a simple evening gown of soft, creamy silk, with a yoke of dark old embroidery that enhanced the gentle gravity of her style, and her black hair flowed off her open forehead to pass under the control of a simple ribbon of silver. A silver necklace enhanced the dusky beauty of her neck. Both husband and wife affected an unnatural ease of manner for the benefit of the efficient parlour-maid, who was putting the finishing touches to the sideboard arrangements. "It looks all right," said Capes. "I think everything's right," said Ann Veronica, with the roaming eye of a capable but not devoted house-mistress. "I wonder if they will seem altered," she remarked for the 3rd time. "There I can't help," said Capes. He walked through a wide open archway, curtained with deep blue curtains, into the apartment that served as a reception-room. Ann Veronica, after a last survey of the dinner appointments, followed him, rustling, came to his side by the high brass fender, and touched 2 or 3 ornaments on the mantel above the cheerful fireplace. "It's still a marvel to me that we are to be forgiven," she said, turning. "My charm of manner, I suppose. But indeed he's very human." "Did you tell him of the registry office?" "No, certainly not so emphatically as I did about the play." "It was an inspiration, your speaking to him." "I felt impudent. I believe I am getting impudent. Had not been near the Royal Society since you disgraced me." "What's that?" They both stood listening. It was not the arrival of the guests, but merely the maid moving about in the hall. "Wonderful man," said Ann Veronica, reassured, and stroking his cheek with her finger. Capes made a quick movement as if to bite that aggressive digit, but it withdrew to Ann Veronica's side. "I was really interested in his stuff. I was talking to him before I saw his name on the card beside the row of microscopes. Then, naturally, I went on talking. He has rather a poor opinion of his contemporaries. Of course, he had no idea who I was." "But how did you tell him? You've never told me. Wasn't it a little bit of a scene?" "Oh, let me see. I said I hadn't been at the Royal Society soirée for 4 years, and got him to tell me about some of the fresh Mendelian work. He loves the Mendelians because he hates all the big names of the 80s and 90s. Then I think I remarked that science was disgracefully under-endowed, and confessed I'd had to take to more profitable courses. "The fact of it is," I said, "I'm the new playwright, Thomas More. Perhaps you've heard." Well, you know he had. "Fame! Isn't it? I've not seen your play, Mr. More," he said, "but I'm told it's the most amusing thing in London at the present time. A friend of mine, Ogilvy, I suppose that's Ogilvy and Ogilvy who do so many divorces, Vee, was speaking very highly of it. Very highly." He smiled into her eyes. "You are developing far too retentive a memory for praises," said Ann Veronica. "I'm still new to them. But after that it was easy. I told him instantly and shamelessly that the play was going to be worth £10,000. He agreed it was disgraceful. Then I assumed a rather portentous manner to prepare him." "How? Show me." "I can't be portentous, dear, when you're about. It's my other side of the moon. But I was portentous, I can assure you. 'My name's not More, Mr. Stanley,' I said. 'That's my pet name.'" "Yes?" "I think... Yes, I went on in a pleasing blend of the casual and sotto voce. 'The fact of it is, sir, I happen to be your son-in-law, Capes. I do wish you could come and dine with us some evening. It would make my wife very happy.'" "What did he say?" "What does any one say to an invitation to dinner point blank? One tries to collect one's wits." "She is constantly thinking of you," I said. "And he accepted meekly?" "Practically. What else could he do? You can't kick up a scene on the spur of the moment in the face of such conflicting values as he had before him. With me behaving as if everything was infinitely matter of fact, what could he do? And just then Heaven sent old Manningtree. I didn't tell you before the fortunate intervention of Manningtree, did I? He was looking quite infernally distinguished, with a wide crimson ribbon across him. What is a wide crimson ribbon? Some sort of knight, I suppose. He is a knight. 'Well, young man,' he said, 'we haven't seen you lately.' And something about Bateson and Co. He's frightfully anti-Mendelian, having it all their own way. So I introduced him to my father-in-law like a shot. I think that was decision. Yes, it was Manningtree really secured your father. He... Here they are," said Ann Veronica, as the bell sounded. Part 2. They received the guests in their pretty little hall with genuine effusion. Miss Stanley threw aside a black cloak to reveal a discreet and dignified arrangement of brown silk, and then embraced Ann Veronica with warmth. "So very clear and cold," she said. "I feared we might have a fog." The housemaid's presence acted as a useful restraint. Ann Veronica passed from her aunt to her father, and put her arms about him and kissed his cheek. "Dear old Daddy," she said, and was amazed to find herself shedding tears. She veiled her emotion by taking off his overcoat. "And this is Mr. Capes," she heard her aunt saying. All 4 people moved a little nervously into the drawing-room, maintaining a sort of fluttered amiability of sound and movement. Mr. Stanley professed a great solicitude to warm his hands. "Quite unusually cold for the time of year," he said. "Everything very nice, I am sure," Miss Stanley murmured to Capes as he steered her to a place upon the little sofa before the fire. Also she made little pussy-like sounds of a reassuring nature. "And let's have a look at you, Vee," said Mr. Stanley, standing up with a sudden geniality and rubbing his hands together. Ann Veronica, who knew her dress became her, dropped a curtsy to her father's regard. Happily they had no one else to wait for, and it heartened her mightily to think that she had ordered the promptest possible service of the dinner. Capes stood beside Miss Stanley, who was beaming unnaturally, and Mr. Stanley, in his effort to seem at ease, took entire possession of the hearthrug. "You found the flat easily," said Capes in the pause. "The numbers are a little difficult to see in the archway. They ought to put a lamp." Her father declared there had been no difficulty. "Dinner is served, mum," said the efficient parlour-maid in the archway, and the worst was over. "Come, Daddy," said Ann Veronica, following her husband and Miss Stanley, and in the fullness of her heart she gave a friendly squeeze to the parental arm. "Excellent fellow," he answered a little irrelevantly. "I didn't understand, Vee." "Quite charming apartments," Miss Stanley admired. "Charming. Everything is so pretty and convenient." The dinner was admirable as a dinner. Nothing went wrong, from the golden and excellent clear soup to the delightful iced marrons and cream, and Miss Stanley's praises died away to an appreciative acquiescence. A brisk talk sprang up between Capes and Mr. Stanley, to which the two ladies subordinated themselves intelligently. The burning topic of the Mendelian controversy was approached on one or two occasions, but avoided dexterously, and they talked chiefly of letters and art and the censorship of the English stage. Mr. Stanley was inclined to think the censorship should be extended to the supply of what he styled latter-day fiction. Good, wholesome stories were being ousted, he said, by vicious, corrupting stuff that left a bad taste in the mouth. He declared that no book could be satisfactory that left a bad taste in the mouth, however much it seized and interested the reader at the time. He did not like it, he said, with a significant look, to be reminded of either his books or his dinners after he had done with them. Capes agreed with the utmost cordiality. "Life is upsetting enough without the novels taking a share," said Mr. Stanley. For a time Ann Veronica's attention was diverted by her aunt's interest in the salted almonds. "Quite particularly nice," said her aunt. "Exceptionally so." When Ann Veronica could attend again, she found the men were discussing the ethics of the depreciation of house property through the increasing tumult of traffic in the West End, and agreeing with each other to a devastating extent. It came into her head with real emotional force that this must be some particularly fantastic sort of dream. It seemed to her that her father was in some inexplicable way meaner looking than she had supposed, and yet also, as unaccountably, appealing. His tie had demanded a struggle. He ought to have taken a clean one after his first failure. Why was she noting things like this? Capes seemed self-possessed and elaborately genial and commonplace, but she knew him to be nervous by a little occasional clumsiness, by the faintest shadow of vulgarity in the urgency of his hospitality. She wished he could smoke and dull his nerves a little. A gust of irrational impatience blew through her being. Well, they'd got to the pheasants, and in a little while he would smoke. What was it she had expected? Surely her moods were getting a little out of hand. She wished her father and aunt would not enjoy their dinner with such quiet determination. Her father and her husband, who had both been a little pale at their first encounter, were growing now just faintly flushed. It was a pity people had to eat food. "I suppose," said her father, "I have read at least half the novels that have been at all successful during the last 20 years. 3 a week is my allowance, and, if I get short ones, 4. I change them in the morning at Cannon Street, and take my book as I come down." It occurred to her that she had never seen her father dining out before, never watched him critically as an equal. To Capes he was almost deferential, and she had never seen him deferential in the old time. Never. The dinner was stranger than she had ever anticipated. It was as if she had grown right past her father into something older and of infinitely wider outlook, as if he had always been unsuspectedly a flattened figure, and now she had discovered him from the other side. It was a great relief to arrive at last at that pause when she could say to her aunt, "Now, dear," and rise and hold back the curtain through the archway. Capes and her father stood up, and her father made a belated movement toward the curtain. She realized that he was the sort of man one does not think much about at dinners. And Capes was thinking that his wife was a supremely beautiful woman. He reached a silver cigar and cigarette box from the sideboard and put it before his father-in-law, and for a time the preliminaries of smoking occupied them both. Then Capes flitted to the hearthrug and poked the fire, stood up and turned about. "Ann Veronica is looking very well, don't you think?" he said, a little awkwardly. "Very," said Mr. Stanley. "Very," and cracked a walnut appreciatively. "Life, things, I don't think her prospects now. Hopeful outlook." "You were in a difficult position," Mr. Stanley pronounced, and seemed to hesitate whether he had not gone too far. He looked at his port wine as though that tawny ruby contained the solution of the matter. "All's well that ends well," he said, "and the less one says about things, the better." "Of course," said Capes, and threw a newly lit cigar into the fire through sheer nervousness. "Have some more port wine, sir?" "It's a very sound wine," said Mr. Stanley, consenting with dignity. "Ann Veronica has never looked quite so well, I think," said Capes, clinging, because of a preconceived plan, to the suppressed topic. Part 3. At last the evening was over, and Capes and his wife had gone down to see Mr. Stanley and his sister into a taxicab, and had waved an amiable farewell from the pavement steps. "Great dears," said Capes as the vehicle passed out of sight. "Yes, aren't they?" said Ann Veronica, after a thoughtful pause. And then, "They seem changed." "Come in out of the cold," said Capes, and took her arm. "They seem smaller, you know, even physically smaller," she said. "You've grown out of them. Your aunt liked the pheasant." "She liked everything. Did you hear us through the archway talking cookery?" They went up by the lift in silence. "It's odd," said Ann Veronica, re-entering the flat. "What's odd?" "Oh, everything." She shivered and went to the fire and poked it. Capes sat down in the arm-chair beside her. "Life's so queer," she said, kneeling and looking into the flames. I wonder if we shall ever get like that." She turned a fire-lit face to her husband. "Did you tell him?" Capes smiled faintly. "Yes." "How?" "Well, a little clumsily." "But how?" "I poured him out some port wine, and I said, let me see, oh, you are going to be a grandfather." "Yes. Was he pleased?" "Calmly. He said, 'You won't mind my telling you?'" "Not a bit." "He said, 'Poor Alice has got no end.'" "Alice's are different," said Ann Veronica after an interval. "Quite different. She didn't choose her man. Well, I told aunt. Husband of mine, I think we have rather overrated the emotional capacity of those dears." "What did your aunt say?" "She didn't even kiss me. She said—" Ann Veronica shivered again. "I hope it won't make you uncomfortable, my dear.' Like that. And whatever you do, do be careful of your hair. I think, I judge from her manner, that she thought it was just a little indelicate of us, considering everything. But she tried to be practical and sympathetic and live down to our standards." Capes looked at his wife's unsmiling face. "Your father," he said, "remarked that all's well that ends well, and that he was disposed to let bygones be bygones. He then spoke with a certain fatherly kindliness of the past. And my heart has ached for him. Oh, no doubt it cut him at the time. It must have cut him. We might even have given it up for them. I wonder if we could. I suppose all is well that ends well. somehow tonight, I don't know. I suppose so. I'm glad the old score's assuaged. Very glad. But if we had gone under... They regarded one another silently, and Ann Veronica had one of her penetrating flashes. "We are not the sort that goes under," said Ann Veronica, holding her hands so that the red reflections vanished from her eyes. "We settled long ago. We're hard stuff. We're hard stuff." Then she went on. "To think that is my father! Oh, my dear, he stood over me like a cliff. The thought of him nearly turned me aside from everything we have done. He was the social order. He was law and wisdom. And they come here, and they look at our furniture to see if it is good. And they are not glad, it does not stir them, that at last, we can dare to have children." She dropped back into a crouching attitude and began to weep. "Oh, my dear!" she cried, and suddenly flung herself kneeling into her husband's arms. "Do you remember the mountains? Do you remember how we loved one another, how intensely we loved one another? Do you remember the light on things and the glory of things? I'm greedy, I'm greedy. I want children like the mountains and life like the sky. Oh, and love, love! We've had so splendid a time and fought our fight and won, and it's like the petals falling from a flower. Oh, I've loved love, dear. I've loved love and you and the glory of you, and the great time is over, and I have to go carefully and bear children and take care of my hair, and when I am done with that I shall be an old woman. The petals have fallen, the red petals we loved so. We're hedged about with discretions, and all this furniture, and successes. We are successful at last, successful. But the mountains, dear, we won't forget the mountains, dear, ever. The shining slope of snow, and how we talked of death. We might have died. Even when we are old, when we are rich as we may be, we won't forget the time when we cared nothing for anything but the joy of one another, when we risked everything for one another, when all the wrappings and coverings seemed to have fallen from life and left it light and fire. Stark and stark! Do you remember it all? Say you will never forget, that these common things and secondary things shan't overwhelm us. These petals, I've been wanting to cry all the evening, cry here on your shoulder for my petals. Petals! Silly woman, I've never had these crying fits before." "Blood of my heart," whispered Capes, holding her close to him. "I know. I understand." End of chapter 17. End of Ann Veronica.